We're minutes from downtown Columbia and about a mile and a half from Interstate 77. Most people pass by and don't know that there were 12,000 years of history on this very spot. We're next to Congaree Creek, and we're standing on Confederate earthworks which were built in 1865 to defend Columbia from the Union Army. For the Congaree Creek, you can't get to this site. It's difficult to find. It's impossible now to get to from Interstate Highway. When you get here, there are no paths, trails, boardwalks as common with our greenway to be able to circulate on the site. Our plan is to open this up, make it ADA capable, provide information to visitors as to what happened here over time, and to make this an excursion that you could take a loop tour, or you could come to study the 12,000 years of history for as long as you want. Well, a visitor would walk back in time. They park their car at the visitor center, slam their door, and walk across the creek, and then they begin to engage in the period of Civil War history. So they can physically touch and walk down the line of earthworks that defended Columbia in 1865. We want to walk them through that war, then walk them through the Revolutionary War period, and then the early settlement period, and then walk them back to Fort Congaree, which is the limit of the British Empire in the early 1700s. So they get a chance to experience the physical place that held Fort Congaree. And then the intent is to recreate it visually with software or in images to convince them here was a garrison, here was a set of folks who were dedicated to defending the colony of South Carolina, also trading with the Native Americans. Part of the visitor attraction can be the physical remnants of history itself. We have a physical remnant we're standing on, but invisible around us there's successive layers of history that can be explored. So one of the options we'd like to include in the park is ongoing archaeology and the ability for visitors to engage in that archaeology.
The landscape and ecosystems of the Paleo-Indian era were very different than they are today. Hardwood trees took over in the colder climates where the evergreens used to flourish, and the land was full of larger animals.
Based on the evidence we have from other areas in this general region of South Carolina, we know that the climate here was, in about 12,000 years, similar to what we have in northern New York today. So it was much colder. You had different types of vegetation, and the animals that roamed in this area were some of the megafauna. They were starting to die out, but there was some things like giant sloths, saber-toothed cats, and even mastodons.
A woolly mammoth is probably a lot bigger than the average rabbit or fox that's inhabiting the Congaree Creek today. But people existed on this site using stone tools. They had fire. We can find their fire pits. We can find the remnants of artifacts left from that ancient period where people subsisted in the wilds with a little bit of nothing.
In the last 20 years, archaeologists have been examining the projectile points like Folsom and Clovis points that have been found in eastern North America, extending down into South Carolina and further south. And they see a lot of stylistic similarities to the Salutrian points that are found in southern France and northern Spain. So we are now starting to believe that man came over from Europe as well as from Asia, and that they perhaps have been here much longer than 12,000 years ago.
Much of the physical evidence from the Paleo-Indian era in South Carolina is scattered about and heavily debated in the scientific community. The Congaree Creek Park could help answer questions about how early civilization in South Carolina evolved, and whether the Paleo-Indians were actually the first North and South American inhabitants. Campsites from every era of the Archaic period can be found at the Congaree Creek Park. Lisa Osteen, one of the first archaeologists to study the area, uncovered a camp that dated between 8000 and 6000 BC in the Congaree Creek Park. After her discovery, other campsites were also found from the Middle and Late Archaic periods. Although most of the organic material, like deer hides and shelters, have long disappeared, we still hope to learn about this ancient culture from the tools that they left behind. Fire-cracked rocks, scrapers, spearheads, and other various tools will help to explain how the first South Carolinians lived. During this time period, the bow and arrow was invented. It was made from a long stick and a deer hide string. This greatly improved living conditions and altered human existence as food became easier to come by. Pottery techniques were greatly improved during this era, and we begin to see artistic patterns and expressions imprinted on ceramics. The arrowhead crafting techniques that were developed and improved upon can be studied to show how this society progressed. Much can be learned about farming innovations during this time from the seeds that could be uncovered in the park. As Spain continued to conquer the world, De Soto was granted the right to explore the New World. De Soto and his army captured native Indians to guide their troops, which outraged the other natives. But De Soto's weapons, horses, dogs, and ruthlessness outmatched the native warriors.
When De Soto came up from what is now northern Florida into this area in the spring of 1540, he was desperate for food because he had to carry and drive his food with him. For example, when he started out of northern Florida, he had a herd of pigs, something like 600. And he had flour and other things that he carried with him. But of course, as he trudged north and then east, things were running out. And by the time he hit this area, there was very little left. And so when he did hit Wateree, he hit nirvana, and that he found food from the people that were living there still, which he calls in his notes the Coffee-Cheek.
Congaree Creek Park holds many artifacts from the Mississippian Indian culture.
Congaree Creek in the Mississippian era is not the classic Mississippian site that we associate with, say, the Black Warrior River in Alabama, where they have Moundville, or Cahokia, in East St. Louis, where they have the largest earthen mound in North America. But we don't have any evidence of mounds being constructed at Congaree Creek, and probably they didn't need to build mounds. Because when we look at mound cultures, we're seeing a much better organization of society, hierarchical, with leaders and sub-leaders and then the working class. And to build mounds takes much more organization. And also, you have to have an extensive farm component where people can grow some of the food that they need. In this area, when Congaree Creek was being lived at, they had enough food that they didn't need that sort of organization. And while they may have had small gardens, they didn't need extensive farmland like they would have needed at Coffee-Cheek, where you had concentrated populations of probably several thousand. Congaree Creek, from what we know today, probably only had at the most a few hundred at its peak of settlement. And anything more would have required much more organization and much more extensive cultivation. So these are things we'll be interested to see what we can discover in an archaeological investigation of what there might be of the mound cultures that these people at Congaree Creek would have associated, would have traded with.
trade with the Indians became vital. However, the practice of black and Indian slave trading soured relationships between the natives and colonists. Colonists used Indian allies as rangers to capture rival Indians for slave trade. As slave trade increased, so did the practice of cheating and mistreating the natives. Several Indian tribes reacted with massive and violent retaliation, which would later escalate into the Yamasee War. Relationships between the colonists, their allied Indians, and their rival Indians were extremely strained and volatile. This war finally resulted in the creation of the Indian Trade Commission, who eventually created Fort Congaree on the Congaree Creek Park site for Indian trading and defense.
They located Fort Congaree here because it's near the fall line. So from this point to Charleston, you had basically a free boat ride. It's on this creek for a defensive position. The trail is to our back, the creek is to one side, and forces an attacking force into a narrow channel of attack so that the limited garrison here could defend it.
Trading between the Indians and colonists continued for many years, but the colonists' mistreatment and untrustworthy actions toward the Indians never went away. After 4 years of trade, it was determined that Fort Congaree cost more to maintain than it was worth, and the fort was closed down. During the 1730s, a general store existed around the same area and was owned by the Brown family.
We've got a bill of sale from John Vaughn, who was an Indian trader at 96, who was selling all of his wares, to Thomas Brown, who was an Indian trader at the Congarees, a famous Indian trader at that. And we also have a grant of land and a plat that involved Patrick Brown, who was Thomas Brown's brother, and basically gave him 300 acres of land along the Congaree River.
Well, Fort Granby was very significant during the war. There was 2 major skirmishes there, and almost every big player of the Revolutionary War was there. You name them, Light Horse Harry, Lee, Greene, Sumter, they're all here at one time or another. And we're very proud of that local history. This gives our Midland area a very important part of the Revolutionary War. The building started off as a trading post in 1765, but very shortly later, in 1780-81, the British saw the prominence of this building on the Congaree River and also on the Old State Road, so this would be a perfect site for them to protect.
After the British took over Fort Granby, just north of the Congaree Creek Park, Thomas the Gamecock Sumter decided to attack their position. Although his attack on Granby failed, it gained him respect and military power in the South. Wade Hampton, one of Sumter's soldiers, and Francis Marion joined in the fight with the British. Marion's hit-and-run fighting style earned him the nickname the Swamp Fox. Several battles later, the British tried to re-establish their fort at Granby. Many of the Continental troops pursued the British from Fort Granby through the Congaree Creek Park down Cherokee Trail. Several skirmishes probably happened in the Congaree Creek Park area.
British garrison at Fort Granby was allowed to retreat down Old State Road, and they were allowed to take with them their ill-gotten gains of loot from surrounding plantations. Little did they know that the relief garrison was just down the Old State Road, so the Continental Army, in essence, fooled them out of position and got them to surrender.
Though little has yet been discovered about the Revolutionary War at Congaree Creek Park, there's surely much to uncover. The Confederate Army built many miles of earthworks along the Congaree Creek Park area to set a staging ground to stop Sherman's troops from advancing into Columbia. These large dirt structures, which were built by slaves and engineers, would provide a defensive high ground for the Confederate soldiers to fight from.
By February 65, many of especially the Southern troops, Confederate troops, they dug in the ground. It was easier to dig trenches and earthworks with moats and have sharpened sticks in front to delay the advance of the infantry. The Confederates figured, hey, we don't have enough men and materials, let's hide behind the earthworks and let the Union charge in front of the sharpened sticks, the moat, the trenches, and have the artillery behind it to inflict a greater number of casualties.
Earthworks were constructed around a bend in the stream at Congaree Creek so that the bridge could be covered by fire and actually be caught in a crossfire. Congaree Creek was an important engagement, at least in one sense. It was the only serious resistance made to try to slow down that advance and delay the capture of Columbia, South Carolina.
Although many thought that Sherman would attack Charleston, his actual target was the capital city. Sherman planned to advance on Columbia by taking Old State Road, which passed over the Congaree Creek on a wooden bridge.
The bridge today is a modern bridge, a big bridge, but back in February of '65, it would have been a small wooden bridge, perhaps even a log bridge, one lane, only a wagon could cross over.
As the Union soldiers approached, heavy gunfire erupted from both sides. The Confederate troops defended the earthworks at Congaree Creek for as long as they could before retreating over the wooden bridge and setting it on fire. However, because of the recent heavy rain, the bridge did not completely burn.
As the Federals charged forward, the Confederates had retreated across the log bridge, the wooden bridge, and the bridge was prepared for burning. Tar and turpentine, probably hay or pine straw was laid upon the bridge. But you've got to remember that January and February were some of the wettest, rainiest months of 1865. And as the Federals charged, the Confederates set fire to the bridge, and lo and behold, it never caught, it never burned. The fires wouldn't start, and the Federals were able to charge into the creek and charge across the bridge and charge to the left and right flanks of the Confederate defenders, because there were only 2,000 to 2,500 Confederate defenders at the bridge versus some 20 to 30,000 Federal troops.
The Confederate troops soon retreated, and the Battle of the Congaree Creek was over. The battle probably lasted for about 6 hours, and only a handful of soldiers were lost from both sides. Columbia was later captured and burned by the Union Army. Research at the Congaree Creek Park could tell us more about this battle, which was the last major defensive stand for the Confederate Army before Columbia was captured. We also hope to preserve and reconstruct some of the earthworks and resurrect some of the cannon batteries from these battles. Research will be conducted to determine the unique foliage, habitats, and environment of the creek.
Well, Congaree Creek area is an interesting area for a variety of reasons. It's basically a mixed hardwood forest with some relatively old trees there. High ground, sloping down toward the water, good wetlands community, moving water, which is nice, and the mix of plants and animals varies from the top of the bluff all the way down to the water. This area is interesting natural history-wise because it's the upper part of the coastal plain. So you're getting close to the fall zone. And at the fall zone, you've got all these northern species that get no farther south, southern species that get no farther north, and there's an interesting mix. And I'm sure the closer you look here, the more that would be evident. That's why these places are so important. You see the plants, and that gives you a glimpse of the diversity of animals. And we know that biodiversity is terribly important. In places like this, the biodiversity is high, and that's a fun place to learn about what biodiversity means. Again, I think the thing that comes across at this piece of property to me is it's close to lots of people, and it's a great mix, and you don't always get that.
The opportunities between the River Alliance and the Department of Natural Resources, I think, are wonderful, and I think that everybody should really be excited about that, because one of the things that we are in the process of doing is creating a canoe trail along Congaree Creek, which is a beautiful blackwater creek that flows through all of these properties. And we can extend that through the archaeological park, provide more opportunities for water-based recreation right here in the capital city. But we can also, because of the nature of the history and the length of that history, 12,000 plus years, Once we have the archaeological park, we'll add in Civil War earthworks that are not on our property, but people will also have the opportunity to learn about things like the clay pits that fed clay to the Ginyard Brickyard. And we also have the learning experience to go back and look at archaeological resources, cultural resources, or thousands of years in these properties.
The vision of Lexington County is planned growth for all of our communities with abundant opportunities for all in a quality environment. The 12,000-year park will help us to accomplish that. And I'm so excited that not only is it something that the people of the Midlands will be able to have ready access to at any time to go to and enjoy and be educated about their heritage, but it's something that people throughout the state, the Southeast, possibly the United States, will be able to get to very easily. Just simply right here in South Carolina, there's Interstate 26, Interstate 77. We're not far from Interstate 20 or Interstate 95. So people from all over will have a great opportunity within a driving distance of an afternoon to come into this park and to, again, take themselves back into history and to take ownership, if you will, in what it will offer them.
This park will be very unique, and we can write our own script as we do the research. We can talk about Paleo-Indians, we can talk about later periods of archaic and woodland settlements, we can talk about the colonial era, and on into the Fort Congaree, very interesting story in terms of its role as a trading post and outpost, frontier outpost in South Carolina. And then later in the colonial era, very important events happened here or happened nearby, and also into the Civil War period. This was the main defense or the main manifestation of the Confederate defense of Columbia.
You have the interesting cross-section of an amazingly important archaeological site with accessibility. So making it easy for people in the Midlands to be able to access that site and learn about the history of what's there. Not many people have that opportunity with the easy accessibility. Certainly to get our high schools involved, you know, the education system in this region will benefit from having such an easily accessible avenue for learning about history and being able to touch what really happened over 12,000 years.
The park is absolutely going to be a destination spot for people to come in with the proximity of I-77 and 26. So with that being said, the south end of the Riverwalk is going to be a very busy place in the near future. So I don't know that there's any other place that I can think of that has a natural preserve, a corporate campus, a medium to large size tennis complex, and have a Class A industrial park all within a mile of each other.
When this becomes an archaeological park, the really great advantage will be the public will understand what was there from the time period of Native Americans through the current archaeological material that's there.
Students of all types, whether they be PhD, postgraduate, K-12 or otherwise, to learn and enjoy the history and how to explore history itself. This will be an amazing opportunity for all people in South Carolina and around our nation, and hopefully will attract folks from around the world with this unique location.
A community benefits from tourism when there is a critical mass, and Columbia is rapidly reaching the point with Riverbank Zoo and facilities like the Adventure and the State Museum. This park is a perfect fit because it marries various disciplines with what we have here in terms of the great history in Columbia and the recreational aspects of the zoo and garden. So I think it's a very, very important piece of the tourism puzzle.
Very little research has been conducted in the Congaree Creek Park, but we hope to learn about the various stages of history through the study of this amazing archaeological site that covers over 12,000 years of human history. The general public will be allowed to watch as real archaeologists make discoveries right before their eyes. And they will be able to ask questions and learn along with the same people who are making these discoveries. Nothing like this exists anywhere else in the world and should boost tourism revenue in the state. There is so much more to discover here.